guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you my top 10 books of 2021. All right, so I'm excited. Today is like the video, right? Like this is everybody's favorite video to watch. I mean, it is mine. I don't know if it is everybody's, but it definitely is my favorite video to watch of other booktubers. Your favorite books of the year, what made the cut? Today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 adult and YA books. Middle grade books will be tomorrow. I will have a top 10 of those as well, so definitely stay tuned for that. But today we are just going to be sharing my top 10 adult books. So, or adult and YA, I should say. So let's see, how do these break down? Let me take a look at them. And how do these break down? We have a little bit of contemporary. We have two contemporaries. We have a sci-fi. We have two nonfiction. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I do that right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 historical fiction. So that's how things broke down a little bit as far as my absolute favorites of the year. So let's just kind of dig into it. The first one that I want to talk about is Iscariot. This is by Tosca Lee. This is a biblical fiction account of Judas. Judas Iscariot, if you are not Christian, if you're not familiar with the Bible stories, Judas Iscariot is one of Jesus's disciples, and he was the one that betrayed him when Jesus was crucified. Judas is the one that betrayed him and turned him over to the authorities. This is an account of Judas starting from when he is a child, kind of going up until that time, and how he became a disciple of Jesus, what kind of could have happened, what could have transpired to lead to him betraying Jesus. I just found this very fascinating. It definitely churned my mind a little. I grew up in the church. I am familiar with these stories, very familiar with these stories. And this was just, I really appreciated the perspective of this. Now, this is fiction, so this is not like biblical at all. This is fiction. But I really appreciated the writing and the really delving into what could have happened. Maybe it wasn't just black and white, you know, and I did appreciate that. So highly suggest this if you have not read it before, specifically if you are of the Christian faith and you have a good understanding of these stories. I think that this one was fantastic. It definitely left an impression with me. All right, let's go. Where should we go next? Let's go sci-fi. So my sci-fi pick had to be Brandon Sanderson's Skyward. You guys have heard me rave about this year. This is a YA sci-fi book that follows Spensa. Spensa's dad was deemed a coward. They live on this like remote planet, and they're at war with these aliens, and in this epic battle her dad like turns tail and runs, and he ends up being shot down by his own army because that's what you do with cowards. And so she is kind of branded the child of a coward. The only issue is she wants to be a fighter pilot. She wants to be part of the, army fighting these aliens, and she wants to defend her country, and she's not really given that opportunity because she has all of this stigma built up against her. And so it's just about her fight to get there, to make that happen, to fight for what she wants and to overcome the odds. And this book was just so good. The character development in this book, oh my goodness, it was next to none. I had never read Brandon Sanderson before I picked this up. Honestly, I'm not a huge fantasy person, so I probably won't pick up any of his adult stuff. But this to me was a winner. I still have not read the sequel, which I'm kind of kicking myself about, but this definitely had to make it on my top 10 list. All right, and then I had another YA book that I read. This is the only one that I don't own, and that is the last book in the Renegades series by Marissa Meyer. This one's called Supernova. This was a series finisher, and it was so good. It had been a couple of years since I read Arch Enemies. which was the second book. So it's Renegades, Arch Enemies, and then Supernova is the last one. And it had been a few years. This is her series that's about superheroes and villains. It's like a heroes versus villains, superheroes story. And we follow Nova, who is part of the villain side of things, and she decides that she's going to infiltrate the Renegades. She's going to try to become one of them and get to them from the inside out. And so we're following her alongside of Adrian, who I think it's Adrian, who is like the son of the head honchos of the Renegades, which are the superheroes. Think Avengers, that sort of thing. So you're following these two teens who end up getting put on the same like team and become friends, and it's just so good. This was like I said, the last one, and so there was lots of battle scenes, but it was so well done. And the ending, like, oh my goodness, the epilogue, shook. I was shook. It was so good. So yeah, definitely, I mean, pick this one up if you like superhero stuff. Like, it was just a lot of fun. This one was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad that I finally got around to finishing that series. All right, the other YA book that was on this list is another historical fiction, and that was Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wine. This is by no means a new book. This is actually a very old book. Let's see, when was 2013? So, you know, it's been around for a while. This is a World War II historical fiction that follows the account of a fighter pilot that has been taken prisoner. And so she's being held as a POW, and you're getting her account of kind of what happened. And then at the same time, you're getting an account of kind of a rescue mission that's going on that they're trying to execute to get her. And so this is definitely fiction. Women during World War II were never put in these positions like she was, and the author explains that in the author's note. But I loved the sarcasm and the wittiness in this. I just thought it was fantastic. There is definitely one point in this book that oh, hey, look, a bookmark, that my jaw hit the floor. I was like, what just happened? But I love the writing in this. I know that maybe I've heard mixed things about this one, but I specifically just love the sarcasm. The girl that is the POW is just really witty, and I love that. And so this one made the list as well. All right. Let's see, what should we do next? Let's go to one of the nonfiction books that made this list. If I were to pick, like, I could probably narrow this down to like a top 3. This would be in the top 3. I couldn't rank all of these, to be completely honest, but I could give you a top 3. This would be in the top 3. And that is The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff. I hosted a read along for this, or a discussion for this on 9/11. And so you can go back and watch that. If you've read this book, you can go in my video history and find that discussion is up. But I was able to discuss this with some of my friends live, and this book was life-changing. We read this for the anniversary of 9/11, and this is an oral history, and it's so many different perspectives are in this. Specifically, I think the thing that sets this book apart from like maybe other accounts is that you get Air Force One, the pilot, the president's aide, everybody that was on Air Force One besides the president. He can't talk about it, but you get all of their perspectives. You get what was going on in DC, at the Pentagon, like air traffic controllers, pilots, the military fighter pilots, people on the ground, people in the buildings at the Twin Towers, the firefighters, you just got all of the different perspectives. There were some chapters in this book that were extremely difficult to read, gut-wrenching, just like you had to read it and then like take a step back and sit with it and not rush through it. But at the same time, like, I think I finished this in like 2 or 3 days because I just couldn't put it down. It was just this bizarre, like, I didn't want to read it, but I couldn't put it down. And it was so good. I personally would highly recommend physically reading this while listening to the audiobook. Then there's so many different narrators as part of this, and they go through so many different things. There's like live audio from the planes, like with the air traffic controllers, but at the same time, there's also like pictures on here as well, and are in here as well. And so I think like having the physical book is important too. So yeah, this was just like hands down, like I will never ever forget this book. Okay, let's talk about another World War II book that I loved, and that is Secrets of a Charmed Life by Susan Meisner. This is the second Susan Meisner that I have loved. I've read it, I think 4 of her books at this point, and a couple of them were just okay. One other one I loved, and this one I got done with this book and I'm like, it was just perfection. It was so good. This book follows Emmeline in 1940s London. She's 15 years old. She wants to be a wedding dress designer, and she gets the opportunity to be an apprentice for a wedding dress designer right before the evacuation orders come in that all the children have to be evacuated. At that time, 16 was considered an adult, and so she's really upset because she wants to do this apprenticeship, but she is required to be evacuated with her younger sister, and it's just her struggling with wanting to pursue her dreams while having to fulfill these familial duties, and it's hard. You're also, alongside of that, getting a present day timeline where you have a Oxford scholar, Kendra, who is interviewing an elderly lady who's like telling her story for the first time, and it was just so good. It was so good. I don't want to say really much because there's lots of spoilers you could give for this, but you haven't read this one yet and you like historical fiction, highly recommend. All right, let's talk a contemporary romance that I thoroughly enjoyed this year, and that is The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This is actually one of her older ones. This was her first one, I believe, 2019, and this follows Tiffy and Leon. They decide that they're going to share an apartment, but they're not a couple. Leon works evenings and he's not home in the evening, so he's like, somebody could sleep here. And Tiffy needs somewhere to stay, so she answers the ad for him. They share this apartment, they never meet, they sleep in the same bed, they never meet, and they start leaving each other post-it notes to communicate, and so they start communicating via post-it notes. They actually end up meeting like halfway through the book. I thought it was going to be much later in the book, but it's just like their little romance, and I loved it. It is a little bit different because the Leon chapters are written in a much different style than the Tiffy chapters. It can be a little jarring if you don't jive with that, but I personally loved it. I will say this also has to do with like gaslighting and domestic violence or domestic abuse, emotional abuse, that sort of thing, not violence necessarily, but it does have to do with that, and as well as like just the justice system. Leon's brother is going through some stuff, and so you get a little bit of that too. So it is a romance, but there's also some heavier subject matter in there as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed this one though. It was definitely one of my favorite romances of the year. So yeah, I like that one. All right. Let's do the other contemporary that I really loved. Okay, this one definitely has mixed reviews. I have not really heard anybody else talk about this except the one person that I got the recommendation from, which I honestly don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Girly Girl Bookworm. And yeah, Wife After Wife. This is by Olivia Hayfield, and this is a modern day retelling of Henry VIII and his 6 wives. I loved this. I ate this up. This is like Henry Rose is a media mogul who owns this huge company, and at the beginning he's married to Catherine and she's pregnant with her first child, and it's set in the 1980s, I think is when it's set. Yeah, 1985 is when it starts, and then it goes all the way to present, and just kind of how his life develops. It's told from many different points of view. You get his point of view, all of the wives, some of his co-workers, all these different like moving parts, and so you get to see everybody's perspective. There's definitely a lot of talk about like women empowerment and things like that in here, but it's not like overkill, which I appreciated. I absolutely ate this up. It was like exactly what I needed at the time. I know I've talked about this like a lot this year, but I thoroughly enjoyed this, like especially if you like Tudor history, if you're familiar with Tudor history. I know there's like a Broadway show, Six, like all of that. Check this out. You may love it. Like I thought it was fantastic. So there's that. All right, the other nonfiction book that made it into my top 10, this is the other one or another one of the ones that definitely would be in my top 3 if I had to pick, and that is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I read this as part of a read along in May, I believe, with Krista from Books and Jams, her channel. She did a few different live discussions with this, and I, like, if you can't tell by all the post-its, and I even like highlighted in here, and it was so good. It was so good. This just has to do with Christianity and like the basics of the faith and like breaking it down. And I love the way that C.S. Lewis can use an analogy and just like make an illustration, or he'll be talking about like some philosophical point and you'll be like, what in the world? Like, I do not understand. And then he'll make an illustration and you're like, oh, that makes total sense. And I love the way that he had the ability to speak to the layman. And even though he was so brilliant, like he was able to write and to speak in a way that was so accessible. This book was actually first a radio broadcast in London during World War II. And so, yeah, it was so good. I remember like when I very, very first started reading it, and like in the first chapter, I'm like reading it and I'm like constantly going to my husband, like, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. And so he eventually picked it up too, because I was just getting kind of obnoxious with it. But so many good little nuggets in here. I want to reread it already. I know like my cousin, I think, like reads this every year, and I could see why, because it is just that good. If you have not read this, like hands down, like highly suggest it. All right, and then my last one, this is the other one that I would say would be in my top 3, like the 2 nonfictions, and this one would be my top 3. And if you just saw my top 5 the last quarter, you will not be surprised that The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna made it onto this list. This is probably, other than the 2 like nonfiction, my favorite book of the year. This was so good. This book, we follow Lenny, who is 13 when the book starts. Her dad is a Vietnam vet and has severe PTSD, and he decides he's going to move his entire family to Alaska. I'm pretty sure they start in Washington State, but they're going to move to Alaska and live off the grid. They're just going to live out in the boonies, and he is kind of conspiracy theory, survivalist kind of mentality. He doesn't want anything to do with government or anything like that. And so he moves his family up there, and it's just about them learning to live off the land during the winter, and or I mean year long, but specifically in the winter when it's really dangerous. And it's lots of domestic violence, emotional abuse, physical abuse, all of it. Very difficult to read at times, will churn your stomach at times, but so impactful. It's really Lenny's, like, I wouldn't say coming of age, but I would say like her story of growing up through all of this. It's a story of survival, both with the physical elements and like what was going on in her home, and emotional, and just being secluded from everyone and being very alone, and how she survived that. And it was so good. I've read a couple of Kristen Hanna's. This is hands down my favorite one, like far and away. For some reason, this one just really resonated with me, and I loved it so much. And also, I mean, like the cover is helping for sure. But yeah, definitely recommend this one if you have not read this one yet. It's just so good. So those were my top 10 reads of 2021. Have you read any of these? What did you think of them? I would be very curious. And yeah, let me know what some of your favorite reads of last year were also. And that's going to do it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.